LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the May 23rd edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I'll be using the 10 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News. The so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. Although Meet the Press preempted for Premier Soccer League this week. So, you know how Chuck Todd always says on the show, if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press. It's a lie. Their slogan is actually a false statement, as I pointed out many times when Meet the Press takes the week off. But I will be supplementing the lack of NBC with a clip from the Sunday show with Jonathan Capehart on MSNBC, and that'll be on my main topic. The Jonathan Capehart clip is Benjamin Crump talking about no justice in policing, ? Which is kind of a double entendre, because it's really talking about the Justice in Policing Act, the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which is kind of stalled in the Congress, in the U.S. Senate. And I don't normally do this, but I'm starting off the show with a telling people, if you really want to help the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act pass, and especially get rid of qualified immunity, which I've talked about at the beginning of one of my shows several weeks ago. This qualified immunity basically lets police officers get away with violating people's rights, even if it's an egregious violation of rights, as long as there's not like a case exactly like it in the past that a court has said violates somebody's rights. It's like this terrible legal doctrine. And so I'm putting a link down, right? The first link in the video description goes to this ACLU action page, Congress and Qualified Immunity. So anywhere in the United States, you can, or actually anywhere in the world really, but this is for people in the United States to tell your member of the House and especially of the U.S. Senate, where it's languishing now, that you want the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act to pass, and you want to get rid of qualified immunity. You remember the case I was talking about several weeks ago from the Fifth Circuit, where the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, a federal court, found that police officers could not be sued because of the qualified immunity doctrine for violating someone's rights, even though they tased someone who had soaked himself in gasoline and threatened to kill himself and set his house on fire, and they tased him right after someone yelled, allegedly, but because of qualified immunity, we never even get to go to court and have the witnesses come in and decide if this happened. But according to what the people are claiming in their claim, their complaint, someone actually said, don't tase him, you're going to set him on fire. And that's actually what happened. They set him on fire by tasing him. He died. His house burnt down. And they were called to stop him from the suicide. Anyway, that is just one of many, many horror stories where police officers and police departments have had this qualified immunity where they can't be sued. And I'll talk about that more when I get to the qualified immunity clips. But I will also have a couple clips at the end on a follow-up topic from last week. I had the Israeli-Palestinian conflict last week, and I will have a couple clips on the Israeli-Palestinian ceasefire that happened this week. And that's also going to be the topic of most of the news summaries. So I put off most of the news summaries to later. I will have one news summary from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where Martha Raddatz did a news summary on how the U.S. Justice Department creates these consent decrees with police departments to make them stop engaging in police misconduct. And anyway, I will get to all that after I give you the political comedy clip. Lots of talking before getting to the political comedy clip, but it's from the season finale of Saturday Night Live. I scoured through Saturday Night Live trying to find a clip on the topic of police misconduct, of justice in policing, and the only part was this funny thing, sometimes funny I guess, that Michael Che and Colin Jost do on Weekend Update, where they like write jokes for each other to read for the first time, never having seen them, to embarrass each other. And anyway, if you believe the premise of the bit, this is a joke Colin Jost wrote for Michael Che to say to embarrass him, which I will talk about a little more after we watch. Oh, and the entire bit is at a link down in the video description. My clip list with my notes for my 10 clips are down there. The source of all the rest of my clips. Also links down in the video description. And anyway, here's the 40 seconds or so from Saturday Night Live last night, the season finale, that I will talk with you about a little more after we watch it together over here.
San Diego police are being investigated after video surfaced of them using excessive force on a homeless black man accused of urinating in public. But I say great work keeping our streets clean, boys. Yes, sir. Anything the police do is all right with old Mikey Che. I know I'm probably the only black man brave enough to say this on live TV, but blue lives matter even more. Oh.
It's really nice of
you. Okay. Whoa.
This week.
So anyway, like I said, I scoured Saturday Night Live for something on the topic, and I don't know, the one thing that I would point out is the reason I chose this topic of no justice in policing this week is because Tuesday is the 1-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd, and that was the deadline set for passing the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, and that the Biden administration set as a possible deadline, and it's not going to happen. And people talked for a long time about, and this was a topic on several of the news programs, as to whether the murder of George Floyd had really changed things. And I saw this interesting New York Times article. I put a link down in the video description to this New York Times article titled, Support for Black Lives Matter Surged Last Year, Did It Last?, which includes some graphs that kind of back up even as insane as what Michael Che was saying there. If you're like white or a Republican, here's like the racial breakdown of how, oh, you can't really see what, I thought when I imported these, oh, it just gave me, oh well, I like took these off of, sorry about that. I like dragged out the images off of the New York Times page, and it gave me the lines from the graph, but did not give me the X and Y axis and like what all the lines mean. Whatever. I should have checked that before I started the show, but there's a link down in the video description where you'll see that Black Lives Matter became, overall, it took a big jump in popularity around the killing, before even the killing of George Floyd, but during the aftermath and all these other cases that have come up during the pandemic in the last year. Black Lives Matter got a lot more popular with everyone, but then less popular as time has gone on, and especially amongst whites and Republicans, the popularity of Black Lives Matter, but even amongst blacks and Hispanics, it's all broken down. I wish, I don't know, I should have checked those graphs. I apologize for that. If you really want to see the graphs I'm talking about, like I said, there's a link down in the video description to the New York Times article. You can see for yourself. And the first clip I want to show you on this topic, like I said, is there was sort of a news summary about the topic of justice in policing. This is Martha Raddatz doing a very corporate news summary. This is very, the corporate news media tends to be pro-police in general. And Martha Raddatz has sort of a soft spot for the military and the police, from watching her over the years. And she does give a lot of time. This is not defund the police. This is not abolish the police. This is like incremental police reform and how it's done, how it's been somewhat successful in Newark, New Jersey. I know a little bit about things that happened in Newark, New Jersey and police many years ago because I did some consulting work for the ACLU affiliate in New Jersey. Next, I will also have a clip of Cory Booker coming up, who was the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, and is now senator from New Jersey, talking on this topic. But George Stephanopoulos gives an introduction explaining how the Department of Justice does these consent decrees. That's where so the federal Justice Department doesn't sue your police department. The police department agrees in a settlement overseen by a judge to let the Justice Department come in and make all these changes, and the judge oversees it, and it's supposed to make things better. And that's kind of what they did in Newark. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch the news summary from Martha Raddatz on this topic, and then she talks to the mayor of Newark, as well as the head of the Office of Public Safety, a police officer, though the Public Safety Office also runs the fire department and I think something else. But then they also talk to this street activist, but one who has worked closely with the police over the years. And I'll talk about all of that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
As the anniversary of George Floyd's murder approaches this week, the push for police reform continues in Washington and around the country. The Minneapolis police are being investigated by the Department of Justice. Dozens of local police departments are already making changes to conform with consent decrees reached with the DOJ. Martha Raddatz reports from Newark, New Jersey.
Newark community activist Daamin Durden has spent much of the last decade working to improve his city's relationship between police and its black residents. When you say the police need to understand the community, what haven't they understood?
The historical racism that has taken place through policing.
But he thinks there has been progress, helped in part by a legal settlement. That 2016 consent decree allowed the federal government to mandate reforms for the Newark Police Department after a Department of Justice investigation concluded there was a pattern of unconstitutional stops, searches, arrests, and unreasonable force with a disparate impact on minorities. Newark Public Safety Director Brian O'Hara has been at the forefront of the department's reform efforts.
We have a community here with people that have been, demanding change in this city around policing literally for decades. It just gave the city the court backing and the mandate to get this stuff done.
One possible sign of progress: Newark police made it through 2020 with 0 shots fired by officers on duty. Is Newark a success story in terms of police reform?
We're not ready to, put a flag in the ground and do a victory lap, but I think we've done tremendous work in the city.
But racial disparities in Newark's policing persist, with black people still accounting for 84% of use of force incidents in the last year. How does that happen? After these reforms, after years and years?
I think in a lot of ways, police are dealing with the end result of a whole lot of social problems in the city and across the country, right? But it's not an excuse at all.
Wait, what does that mean, dealing with a whole lot of social problems across the country?
Concentration of social disadvantage, historical problems that have been building up for decades.
My experience shows something else, that, there's hypervigilance in our communities, and that, we're actually looked at differently than other communities.
O'Hara, who has worked with Durden over the years, agrees.
I think there's a difference between disparity that is based on those social problems versus disparity based on what a particular officer may be doing, which is something we have to look for.
Now a consent decree could be in store for Minneapolis, the DOJ announcing an investigation into its police department a day after former officer Derek Chauvin's conviction in the murder of George Floyd. That verdict, while welcomed, still leaves some Newark leaders wary of what comes next.
And what we saw in Minnesota is not something that happens all over the country. Police don't take the stand against other police officers. That's just not the culture of what's going on, and that has to change.
Thanks to Martha for that. On Tuesday night, a special Soul of the Nation.
And they're on ABC or Hulu. You can see their Soul of the Nation after George Floyd special if you want to follow the ABC News coverage on that issue. Like I said, this Tuesday is the 1-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. And it has led to a lot of changes. And I think it's like expanded the Overton window to include things like defund the police and abolish the police. Although, like I said before I showed that clip, I think Martha Raddatz had a much more pro-police view of it. And do you think that news summary there, I mean, it was the best news summary from the big 5 corporate outlet shows, or the 4 that were on since there was no Meet the Press. It was the best news summary of the George Floyd issue and the justice and policing issue that I wanted to cover today from those 4 programs. Not as good as what they did on Jonathan Capehart, the Sunday show with Jonathan Capehart, but it was still very, I thought it really favored, that narrative really favored the director of public safety, Brian O'Hara, basically the police chief, although also the fire chief, like I said, but he is a former police officer. I thought his narrative was really favored by Martha Raddatz there, and especially sort of like there may be individual officers who are racist, which he didn't quite say, but kind of said, but there's no systemic racism. That's all social problems. But, if you read like the new Jim Crow here, you find out that the whole, it's not just the mass incarceration doesn't just have to do with policing. It also has to do with some of those social problems that were created by the post-Jim Crow so-called race-neutral ways of making African Americans second-class citizens. And I would really recommend anyone who wants more information on that to read this book, The New Jim Crow. But I don't think that there was any of that nuance in the ABC report, even though it was the best one, other than the Sunday show with Jonathan Capehart, where they had several different guests talking about the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. They even had this, in this next segment I'm going to show you, they even showed this great graphic here of some of the things in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, H.R. 1280, the congressional bill that overhauls qualified immunity, the thing I talked about at the beginning, federally bans chokeholds, prohibits no-knock warrants in federal drug cases, outlaws racial profiling, creates a national registry of police misconduct. One thing that's missing in there that will come up in the Cory Booker clip I'm going to show next is the change in the use of force standard. What is reasonable use of force by a police officer? So that was missing in the chart. But otherwise, this explanation from Benjamin Crump talking to Jonathan Capehart on the Sunday show with Jonathan Capehart this morning, I think is very informative, very insightful. I'm a big fan of Benjamin Crump. And Jonathan Capehart asks about the loss of momentum. And I guess the family of George Floyd is going to meet with President Joe Biden on Tuesday on the 1-year anniversary. So that should be a news event. And the one thing that this clip makes me really think about is how great it is. I'm not the biggest fan of Joe Biden. He wasn't my first choice amongst the Democrats. But it's so much better having Joe Biden in office than Trump. One reason is because of those consent decrees that the Justice Department does that basically didn't even happen for the last 4 years in the Trump administration. But watch through this Benjamin Crump answer to a couple questions from Jonathan Capehart this morning to really hear emotionally for people like the family of George Floyd how much difference it makes to have Joe Biden rather than Donald Trump as president over in this clip.
To have a conversation on racial reckoning. There was a lot of flurry of activity in the days, weeks, months after the murder of George Floyd. But how concerned are you that that momentum is actually waning?
Well, Jonathan, tragically, we all pray that George Floyd was the tipping point, that it would lead to a new precedent where we would see a reduction in these unjustified, unnecessary killings of black people in America. However, we have been reminded repeatedly that we still have a long way to go. And so the real hope is that we will get the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed, so we will have more accountability when these officers engage in excessive use of force and kill marginalized people of color in America.
Speaking of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, George Floyd's family and you will be going to the White House on Tuesday to meet with President Biden. Is one of the goals in that meeting to push the president, to push Congress, particularly the Senate, to get a deal done and get the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed?
Well, I know President Biden has talked with George Floyd's family several times since the tragedy happened, and I think he wants to concentrate on trying to add comfort to them on this one-year anniversary. Obviously, we pray that he uses his influence to be able to pressure the Senate to do something meaningful in the name of George Floyd and these other families like Breonna Taylor and others, because their blood is on this legislation.
Attorney Crump, what has it meant to the Floyd family to have been in such close contact with the President of the United States?
You know, you try to make sure you understand the historical nature of the president calling you. You know, when the president called my cell phone after the verdict, when Derek Chauvin was found guilty, you know, we were very emotional at the time. And then it took my mother saying, you know, did the president have your cell number? How did he reach you? And it put it in perspective that this is the leader of the free world, using his influence to say that this Black life matters, that Black lives matter. And so it is my belief that the George Floyd family, they understand how incredibly important this is, that the President of the United States is having dialogue with them, because he is saying that this is not just a Black issue, this is an American issue.
You know, Attorney Crump, you mentioned the trial of
And what did you think of that chyron there in the like 20 seconds from the end? Crump, Biden understands Floyd's Black life mattered or something. That, I mean, I guess that kind of supports what I was talking about in terms of the difference between having President Joe Biden versus President Donald Trump. You know, someone who, well, I mean, Joe Biden has the ability to exhibit human empathy, unlike the semi-reptilian or whatever, I don't know what you call that type of personality, sociopath or whatever, who was the former guy in the White House. So it's nice to have like an actual human being, even if he is you know, a establishment politician or whatever. But I think he will be a good host to the family of George Floyd, unlike what I would expect from Donald Trump. If I mean, I remember he said George Floyd is looking down on us and happy about how great the economy is, or how we're making these jobs, or I can't even remember what crazy thing Trump said about George Floyd at some point. But I thought that was, like I said, a very informative, illuminating answer from Benjamin Crump, and I'm a big fan of his. And there's a link down in the video description to check out the entire, or to get more video from the Sunday show with Jonathan Capehart, which I actually watch every Sunday. I think is a great replacement for AM Joy, now that Joy Reid moved on to the Readout in the evenings on MSNBC. And that is the clip I'm using to make up for the lack of NBC and Meet the Press. And now the next clip I want to show you, this is Cory Booker over on CNN State of the Union talking to Dana Bash, and he talks about qualified immunity and doesn't really answer the question about this clip from several weeks ago. James Clyburn, the House Majority Whip and a close friend of President Joe Biden, especially after Clyburn got basically got Joe Biden the nomination by helping swing the vote towards him in the South Carolina primary. If you remember how that all happened, that was basically when Biden made his comeback, was based on James Clyburn saying, and James Clyburn seems willing to negotiate or give up on qualified immunity, and That's the first thing that Danabash asks Cory Booker about, but then follows up with this change in use of force that I was talking about earlier, which Cory Booker does not talk about well. But let's watch the whole 5-minute clip here together, and I will talk about it a little more after we watch how CNN handled this with Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey this morning over here.
So let's dig in on the work that you have to do. One of the sticking points, I don't need to tell you, is what's known as qualified immunity for police, which effectively shields officers from lawsuits. I know you and your fellow Democrats want to end that. Republicans say, for the most part, that it needs to stay. I want you to hear what the House Majority Whip, Jim Clyburn, said on this show a few weeks ago.
I will never sacrifice good on the altar of perfect. If we don't get qualified immunity now, then we'll come back and try to get it later. But I don't want to see us throw out a good bill because we can't get a perfect bill.
Senator, is ending qualified immunity for individual officers a red line for you, or do you agree with what you just heard Congressman Clyburn say?
Well, what I agree with what he said is that we need to, at some point, get qualified immunity. It's what I'm determined at this negotiating table to get. And these are labels that a lot of folks don't know what they mean. This means that in the United States of America, any profession that where you violate in a serious way the civil rights of another American, should someone be shielded. This is not about going after good officers. This is about when officers have breached the civil rights of another American citizen. And to me, we need this to create real accountability. So I'm at the negotiating table fighting for that. We have to have a nation where when you do wrong, again, not the good officers, but when folks have done wrong, violated someone's fundamental constitutionally protected rights, that there is not a shield in the judicial system, but true accountability where they are not above the law, but are held accountable by it.
I hear you that you're fighting for that at the negotiating table right now, but is it possible that you're willing to have less than in order to get the broader bill and fight another day?
Again, I'm not negotiating this in public. I've said where my line is. We wrote a bill with Senator, now Vice President Harris in the Senate, along with our House allies, Karen Bass, Congressman Nadler, that said very clearly, we want to eliminate qualified immunity. And that is where we're starting. Clearly, you've heard very publicly the red lines on the other side. And again, this is one of the big issues that we're working very hard to see if we can bridge this wide gulf.
There's another big issue that you are working on, which is lowering the threshold to criminally prosecute police officers. Republican Senator Tim Scott, who you're working with very closely, has said publicly that's off the table as far as he's concerned. What's your response to that?
Again, I start with our fundamental American values. When someone violates the law, again, this is not about the officers out there who every single day go into tough situations, do their job. This is about people who violate the law, often ending in someone's death. We've seen the videotapes of these things that do not comport with not just our common values, but even the police profession looks askance and looks down on. We have to have a real criminal accountability. And again, nobody in America, from the President of the United States all the way down to all of our citizens, should be above the law. And this is, again, something that I'm working with. And look, I've had some incredibly constructive conversations with police leaders who know that what we are seeing now because of videotapes and body cameras, which we didn't have generations ago, I'm confident that these same things were going on. It's why Martin Luther King on the March on Washington put police brutality in his I Have a Dream speech. Now we're seeing this every single day. The profession itself, here in New Jersey, applications to the state police are at a historic low, about 90% less people even applying to be New Jersey state troopers. We have a crisis of policing in America. It's not new, but we have to come together and fix it. And one of the things that public needs is trust, transparency, accountability, to make sure that we all feel confident that our policing is meeting the standards of our nation. If we keep saying that police officers are somehow above the law, that will never establish the kind of trust that we need in America to move forward.
And Senator, you well know you're up against a good number of Republicans across the aisle who are still questioning whether there is.
So Dan Abash did not follow up on that second question. On the first question on qualified immunity, I agree with Cory Booker. I've been reading along the live comments along the way, and I see there's some people who aren't Cory Booker fans. I'm not a big Cory Booker fan. I think he's definitely a politician in sort of the most pejorative sense of the word. But his answer on qualified immunity was right on. He often says things that I don't disagree with, that I agree with strongly. Oh, and by the way, I'm talking about looking at the live comments. I saw I got a super chat contribution from Tom Trask thanking me. So thank you, Tom, for that support. I always appreciate when my live viewers support my videos with super chat contributions. It gives me sort of a live boost of energy during the show to know that people think what I'm doing is worthwhile enough to give it value in a capitalist system or whatever. I don't know. I often have like long arguments with myself about whether my work has value independent of the amount of money that it earns, because, you know, capitalism isn't always the answer. But now I'm going off on a long digression that I really just want to say thank you, Tom, and thanks to the live viewers who support me with those super chat contributions. And the other thing I wanted to say about Cory Booker, even though his qualified immunity answer was good, and his answer on the use of force, I don't even know, based on that answer, I don't even know if he knows what is the change in the use of force standards for police officers that's in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Like I said earlier, if you look at that chart from MSNBC, they didn't even mention that part, that it changes the use of force standard. But right now, and if you watch the Derek Chauvin trial, you know that the use of force standard in most places in the country is the reasonable officer standard, which allows officers to say, you know, they reasonably feared for their lives like any other officer in that situation would, and then they get to use deadly force. I mean, that's one of the things that didn't really work well for, that was so, the reason I think that the George Floyd murder was such a shock to a lot of Americans, because first of all, the whole thing, like the 8 minutes 46 seconds was the Chris Rock thing, but then ended up being like 9 minutes 29 seconds. The whole thing was recorded on video, and it got rid of the two arguments that officers often make in that situation, or the two things that they're trained to say, which is feared for my life, that's what I was just talking about, the reasonable officer standard, and then the other is had to make a split-second decision. Well, they actually tried to use the feared for my life thing in the Derek Chauvin trial for murdering George Floyd. It didn't work out because, you know, they said they feared from the crowd, or they feared from, you know, big, scary George Floyd, and the jury didn't buy it. And then 9.5 minutes with, you know, choking someone to death or whatever, asphyxiating someone, that's not a split-second decision. But the change in use of force standard that's in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act goes from the reasonable officer standard to necessary force. So it has to be a last resort. The officers have to try to de-escalate if possible. It has to be not only that they were scared and so that they came out shooting or whatever. It actually has to be there wasn't anything else they could have done to avoid the use of deadly force. And that's a big change. That's something we did in California with a bill that I, as a small, in a small way, as an activist, helped support with the ACLU. AB 392, we actually changed our use of force standard so though that from reasonable to necessary. That's a simplistic way to look at it, but there was a lot more complicated things to it than that. But the simplistic way of looking at it is reasonable to necessary. The force, because that reasonable is what everybody gets for self-defense, but we should hold police officers to a higher standard. And if you go back and listen to Cory Booker's answer on the use of force change, he was saying like police officers are, they can't be above the law and they're violating the law. But no, the use of force standard is a law that they're not violating, and we need to change the law so it's easier to say they violated it, because they may have used reasonable force, but was it necessary? No. And Cory Booker in that last answer, I don't think he showed that he even understood that. If you go back and watch it, trust me, I got the impression Cory Booker does not understand that part of the law that or at least maybe he didn't hear the question, or it's hard for me to believe he doesn't understand such an important part of a law that he's like a co-author of. But I guess I've been surprised by the incompetence of politicians before. But you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I'm going to move on. I also got a super chat contribution from Lulu Girl. Be sure to let us know any change in the schedule. Put the live in 2 days out early. Evenings are best for me, whatever. No pressure. Okay. Well, I think I'm actually going to start doing the show. I'm going to do it next Sunday during the 3-day weekend. Sometime in the afternoon or evening as usual. But then starting June 7th, instead of Sunday, June 6th, I'm going to do it Monday, June 7th, probably at like noon Pacific time. But thank you for reminding me, Lulu Girl, to tell everyone about the schedule change coming up in 2 weeks. And the whole point of doing it on Monday, well, one of the many points of doing it on Monday is that I will always be able to do the show at the exact same time. Well, I will be able to schedule it the same time every week, so maybe that will get people to show up, because I did it at 2 p.m. last week and at like 6:45 p.m. this week, and if I do it on Mondays, I will always be able to do it at the same time in a like almost exact time so that people can depend on it. So anyway, that was the last clip I was going to show in the main topic that I wanted to talk about this week, because it's something I've worked on. I used to be a public defender. I've worked as an ACLU activist on all sorts of local ways and state ways of increasing police accountability and transparency. You can see the new Jim Crow here. You can see the book Chokehold. You can see, I was talking about this Chris Hayes book, A Colony in a Nation, all sorts of sources behind me that let you know more about that topic. But now I'm going to move on to the main the main topic that the corporate media was covering was mainly the Israeli ceasefire in their news summaries. There's a little bit of other stuff, but I'm going to start with the news summaries with CBS News Face the Nation. John Dickerson, first he gave a summary of the ceasefire that you'll hear similar to some of the other news programs, but they actually had a reporter in Gaza that I think gave a report that is definitely the most pro-Palestinian of all the news reports I've seen from the big five corporate outlets. And there's this interesting interview with an Israeli intelligence officer who points out the corrupt Netanyahu impulse that started this whole thing, and actually blames the Israelis for this latest conflict in a way you don't see much in the news media, and you won't see in the Fox News summary Fox News Sunday news summary that follows, which is polar opposite. But anyway, here's the CBS News Face the Nation news summary, mainly about Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian ceasefire this week over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. A ceasefire between Israel and Hamas militants appears to be holding as we come on the air. Humanitarian aid began rolling into Gaza as people in bombed-out neighborhoods combed through the debris. picking up what's left behind. All this as hundreds of Hamas fighters paraded through the streets of Gaza City in a show of defiance after 11 days of fighting that left more than 250 people dead. The vast majority were Palestinians. CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tyab is standing by in Jerusalem, but we begin with a report from CBS News foreign correspondent Holly Williams in Gaza.
Hamas celebrated the ceasefire with a victory parade through the streets of the Gaza Strip. They govern Gaza and are classed by the US as a terrorist organization. The conflict has helped bolster the image of their leader, Yahya Sinwar, as the defender of the Palestinian cause. But this doesn't look like a win for the people of Gaza. Israeli airstrikes killed more than 240, according to officials here, including 66 children.
And then over here's this is the reception.
This used to be the Gaza International Hotel. Owned by Afaf Abu Jaber and her family, they built the business up over 25 years, until an Israeli airstrike targeted the multi-story building just next door. There was a warning in this neighbourhood and they got out of the hotel in time. But Afaf's dreams have been shattered.
I don't want to cry, but when I saw this, I'm very cried in my heart.
Israel is also claiming victory, saying it killed over 200 militants. But 12 civilians in the country lost their lives to Hamas rockets, and some Israelis are sceptical. Gonen Ben Itzhak is a former Israeli intelligence officer, credited with preventing dozens of Palestinian terrorist attacks.
I'm just a patriot.
He blames Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, for igniting the clashes as he fights for political survival.
And the goal is to keep his position.
Hamas are war criminals, he says, but Israel's actions are helping them.
And I think to myself, what would have happened if I would live in Gaza? I guess that at least I would go to the border and throw stones, maybe become a terrorist, because nobody gives me any hope, nobody gives me any future.
Political leaders on both sides are scoring points, while people in Israel and here in Gaza are mourning their dead and counting their losses. John.
Holly Williams reporting from Gaza. We turn now to CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tyab. He's been reporting from Israel since soon after the current crisis started. Imtiaz, I wanted to get...
And I had that report from Imtiaz Tyab last week, and as usual, if you go to the link down in the video description to CBS News' Face the Nation, that link leads to their the CBS News Face the Nation YouTube channel, where you can see pretty much the entire program split into segments, including that report from Imtiaz Tyab. But I thought Holly Williams, like I said, did a better job of reporting the Palestinian perspective, and also the perspective of like the people versus the leaders. You know, because Benjamin Netanyahu, I showed a clip of him last week and made it pretty clear I'm not a fan of Benjamin Netanyahu, and I have a clip of Bernie Sanders at the end explaining again why Benjamin Netanyahu is not a war criminal, is a right-wing racist leader of Israel, and that's one of the reasons that Israel has lost the left. Which you'll see talked about on Fox News. Well, has been talked about on Fox News incessantly. This anti-Israel feeling that's starting in some part of the Democratic Party, but I think, like I said, Holly Williams showed both how the ordinary people are not being represented well by their leaders, either by Benjamin Netanyahu or Hamas, which is not the greatest representative of the Palestinian people, and so the ordinary people suffer, as Holly Williams was saying in that report. This next report, Fox News Sunday, much more pro-Israel, as you might expect, and I'm even going to show you an interview that Chris Wallace did with an advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu, where he says, well, he even starts the question with the premise that the Palestinians started it, which is what I criticized the Fox News Sunday news summary last week for emphasizing that. And this week, they talk about the number dead. They don't say they're mostly Palestinian like they did in the CBS news summary, I don't think. And then they also really put more responsibility on Biden, I think, than is necessary, because, of course, Fox News is a propaganda outlet for the Republican Party, which I won't go into. That would be a big digression, so I'll just show you the Fox News Sunday news summary from Chris Wallace, handing off to Mark Meredith, that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. That fragile ceasefire is still holding in the Middle East after 11 days of fighting between the Israelis and Palestinians left almost 300 dead. President Biden is walking a fine line, promising to rearm Israel while working to provide humanitarian aid to Gaza. And he's also dealing with a sharp split among Democrats about support for Israel. In a moment, we'll speak with Mark Regev, senior advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. But first, let's turn to Mark Meredith at the White House with the latest on the conflict and the politics here at home. Mark.
Chris, President Biden has spent a lot of time on the phone lately urging Palestinian and Israeli officials to stop fighting. And as you mentioned, while the ceasefire is holding today, the president is facing a long list of questions about how he hopes to achieve lasting peace in the Middle East.
I'm praying this ceasefire will hold. I take Bibi Netanyahu when he gives me his word. I take him at his word.
The U.S. says it firmly supports Israel's right to defend itself from terrorist groups like Hamas. But some progressives say it's the Israelis who need to be reined in.
We should be bringing people together, not just being one-sided and say everything that Israel does is good, because it is not.
In the wake of civilian deaths in Gaza, some Democrats want the White House to cancel a massive arms sale to Israel. Republicans say it's proof Democrats are divided.
I think at least half the Democrats are hostile to Israel. The rest of them are afraid of those who are hostile to Israel.
Violence abroad has many fearful of increased anti-Semitic attacks here at home. Cell phone cameras capturing multiple violent incidents, with Los Angeles police investigating a fight at a restaurant as a possible hate crime.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken is set to visit the Middle East in coming days. He's expected to meet with Israeli, Palestinian, and regional leaders, all of whom may be crucial to keeping this ceasefire in place. Chris?
Mark Meredith reporting from the White House. Mark, thank you. And joining us now from Jerusalem, Mark Regev, senior advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu.
And I will have a clip of that interview with Mark Regev coming up. Which, like I said, will show some more Fox News bias in terms of the premise of the question being that Hamas started it. But I think you saw some of the bias I talked about in the news summary before I showed the clip, and also the thing I was talking about in terms of how Fox News is really perseverating on the split in the Democratic Party, that for the first time, there seems to be a large number of Democrats who are at least balanced or even leaning towards the Palestinians. And like I said, a lot of it has to do with Benjamin Netanyahu himself being a very partisan figure and making himself a partisan figure in U.S. politics. He sided with Trump and against the Democrats several different ways in the last few years, and also over the Iran deal. And so Benjamin Netanyahu was kind of reaping what he's sown in terms of losing a large or a significant part of the Democratic Party. And like I said, I will show Bernie Sanders talking about some of the best reasons why in the final news clip I'm going to show. But I have two more news summaries, and then also the Mark Regev interview with Chris Wallace showing some more Fox News bias before I get to Bernie Sanders. The next news summary, actually, this is CNN State of the Union. Both of these next two are short. This one's less than 90 seconds. It actually covers a story I'm not covering this week, the split in the Republican Party, or the Republican Party's continuing move away from reality and trying to rewrite history in terms of the January 6th insurrection. The bipartisan January 6th Insurrection Commission looks like it's about to die in the Senate, which you'll see Dana Bash talking about in the beginning of CNN's State of the Union this morning, where, of course, Jake Tapper, her co-host, started this tradition of always saying, what is the State of the Union this week? And this week it is hitting a wall, and not just on the January 6th Commission, but also police reform, infrastructure, talking about how the Biden administration seems to be losing a little bit of legislative momentum. In the CNN State of the Union news summary, I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the state of our union is hitting a wall, with Senate Republicans this week likely to kill legislation to create a bipartisan commission on the January 6th Capitol insurrection. It begs the question, if Congress can't agree on investigating an attack in which they were the target, what will they be able to agree on? Much of President Biden's sweeping agenda is currently stalled in Congress, while Democrats try to reach compromise with Republicans, and on some issues, even within their own party. Now, the House is now on a 3-week break, as Democratic initiatives from gun control to voting rights don't appear to be making headway. In moments, we'll talk with Senator Cory Booker about where things stand on police reform, as Democrats acknowledge they are all but certain to miss a key deadline this week. But we start with the president's big push on infrastructure. On Friday, the White House dropped the price tag to $1.7 trillion, down from the original $2.25 trillion. But a spokeswoman for the lead Republican in negotiations said the White House counteroffer suggests that the two sides were actually getting further apart. Joining me now is White House senior advisor Cedric Richmond. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. So let's start there.
And are you mad at me that I'm not covering the infrastructure debate and how the Biden administration is negotiating by dropping the price $550 billion? Or are you falling asleep already? Or it's actually really important, but it's not the most interesting topic. And like I said, I'm not really covering that. And the January 6th Commission thing, I almost decided to go in that direction, and it is pretty important. Like I said, as usual, you can click on the link in the video description to watch those parts of the programs I'm not covering, although I just saw, thank you to Darian Mesa for that super chat contribution, thanking me for saving you the time that you don't have to watch those shows. But actually, if you want to see things like the infrastructure debate coverage that I'm not covering, you do have to watch the shows. But I'm picking out the topics that most interest me, or the clips that I thought I could add some media criticism and political commentary value to make it worth your while to watch my commentary on the news shows. And I also saw I got the super chat contribution from Jimmy Touchdown asking if I was related to Wahoo McDaniel, who I had to Google before I could answer, or Walter Cronkite, who I know who that is, but I'm not related to either one. I guess there was some discussion in the live comments earlier about I present as a cross between those two people, but I'm Walter Cronkite. He was a great broadcaster, so I guess that is a great compliment, just as someone who's speaking on camera. Wahoo McDaniel, I guess, was a wrestler. I don't know much about that, though. So, but thank you, all the Super Chat contributors again. And now I'm going to move on to the final news summary. Very short. ABC they had Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, on, so they started with a brief summary of what's going on in the Middle East, with the same thing with the ceasefire. And I will talk about that a little more after we watch that final news summary together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. As we come on the air this morning, the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is holding, despite scattered clashes in Jerusalem and the devastation caused by 11 days of rocket launches and military retaliation. That destruction creates the potential for new violence, poses a challenge to President Biden, and raises a host of questions for our headliner, Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Good morning, Mr. Secretary. Welcome to This Week.
Thanks, George. Great to be with you.
Let's start with this.
And instead of having an Antony Blinken clip, I have a former ambassador. He goes with the title ambassador, but this senior advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu, Mark Regev. And as I was talking about earlier, there are a couple types of Fox News bias in this clip. First, like I was talking about last week, the Fox News Sunday news summary on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict started with the Palestinians as the first strikers, and I mean, you can take this going all the way back to like the Bible and try to figure out who. I mean, even when the Jews, if you read the Bible, first came into the land of Israel, well, first Abraham was there, and then they left and went to Egypt, and then when they came back, there were all these people living there, the Canaanites, the Philistines. They had to go and like fight all these battles, and so there were already people that living there thousands of years ago, and which of those people are the Palestinians now, I couldn't tell you, but I'm just saying, where you start the story, you could start at a lot of different places and decide who's to blame. But Fox News Sunday in their news summary started with like Hamas firing rockets, not with the what was going on with the evictions in the Jerusalem neighborhood that was, some people say, the instigator here, and that Benjamin Netanyahu was looking to make trouble because he had problems with forming a government and with corruption charges. And anyway, that's I'm going into too much introduction before the clip, and I should really just say that Chris Wallace, again, just like last week where they started the story with Hamas firing rockets, he actually makes it the premise of his question. You know, there's no question that Hamas started this, but you still did a lot more damage. At least he makes up for the fact that in the Fox News Sunday news summary earlier, they talked about the hundreds dead, but not who took the most damage, which at least shows up in Chris Wallace's question, along with the bias I talked about, and I will talk about the rest of the bias after we watch that clip together over here.
There is no question that Hamas started the military conflict, firing 4,300 rockets into Israel and killing at least a dozen Israelis. But I think you would agree that the toll was much heavier on the Hamas side in Gaza. And I want to put up some numbers on that. At least 248 Palestinians killed, including 66 children and 39 women. 800,000 people in Gaza do not currently have access to piped water. Ambassador, any second thoughts about whether the Israeli response during these 11 days was proportionate?
They were firing thousands of rockets, as you just said, on our civilian population. They were trying to murder our people in their homes. We were defending ourselves. Our operation was fundamentally designed simply to protect our civilian population. Now, in the process of fighting back, we were trying to be as surgical as is humanly possible. In a very complex combat situation, they were firing out of schools, they were firing out of built-up areas, they were firing out of homes, out of mosques, even out of playgrounds. And we tried to be, as I said, to hit the terrorists and not to see innocent people caught up in the crossfire. And while our goal was to avoid civilian casualties, Hamas had actually the exact opposite goal. They were aiming their rockets at our people, trying to kill them. And of course, they were brutally abusing Gaza civilians as a human shield for their war machine. We know for a fact that many of the casualties in this operation were caused by Hamas munitions. Almost 20% of their rockets fell short, landing in Gaza, killing Gaza civilians. It didn't bother them at all. They kept doing that. Part of the death and destruction was because of their ordnance, their explosives going off. We made a maximum effort to minimize human casualties. They did exactly the opposite.
One difference is that this time Israel came under some heavy fire from the left wing of the Democratic Party. And I want to play some of the clips of that kind of rhetoric this past week. Take a look, sir.
Palestinians aren't going anywhere, no matter how much money you send to Israel's apartheid government.
Every rocket and bomb that targets civilians is a war crime.
Benjamin Netanyahu has cultivated an increasingly intolerant and authoritarian type of racist nationalism.
Ambassador, do you worry that Israel is losing support among some major political elements here in the United States? And to what degree that you're losing that support does that bolster Hamas and hurt Israel?
Well, I can tell you this morning, before coming to this interview, I looked at the polling, and I saw that the overwhelming majority of the American people stand with Israel, support Israel, are favorable towards Israel. A majority of people who identify as Democrats also support Israel, favor Israel. And even I saw people who self-identify as liberal Democrats are favorable towards Israel. Of course they want to see peace, but Israel wants to see peace too. We'd love to have peace with our Palestinian neighbors, and people need to understand Hamas is not just Israel's enemy. Hamas is the enemy of everyone who wants to see peace and reconciliation in our part of the world. They're a brutal, jihadist, terrorist group. No one should make excuses for them.
So how do you understand?
Of course, nobody's really making excuses for Hamas, and I talked about the bias at the beginning of that clip where Chris Wallace premised his question on Hamas having started it, but you also saw, like I was saying, the perseveration or the obsession on Fox News with the split on the left and the so-called anti-Israel left in the Democratic Party, although the final news clip I'm going to show you is to sort of mitigate that a little bit. Bernie Sanders, he's not anti-Israel. He's certainly anti-Netanyahu and right-wing Israel government. That doesn't make him anti-Israel, and Bernie Sanders is a great messenger here in that, of course, he's Jewish, so he has some protection against the charge of anti-Semitism, which comes up in his answer here, talking to John Dickerson on CBS News' Face the Nation. You can see the entire interview at a link down in the video description, the CBS News Face the Nation link. The thing that I have to point out, though, about Bernie Sanders in terms of criticism of his answer is, he is a politician, and he does dodge the question I talked about last week, as to whether the word apartheid is properly applied to the Israeli system. You noticed Chris Wallace in his question to Mark Regev played that clip. Was it Rashida Tlaib? I think it was Rashida Tlaib or Ilhan Omar. I can't remember who used the word apartheid and I think that sometimes you get in trouble with analogies. Israel isn't. There are differences between Israel and South Africa. So I'm not sure apartheid is completely applicable, and you'll see Bernie Sanders dodges the question, doesn't say yes, doesn't say no, but the rest of what he says, I think, is a really important way to differentiate the Fox News caricature of the anti-Israel left with the pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian balanced left. Balance, wanting the right to exist and the right to reasonable life to both Israelis and Palestinians, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that final news clip. John Dickerson talking to Bernie Sanders this morning over here.
I want to start in the Middle East. You have made the case that how the U.S. government responds in this ceasefire period says something about President Biden's commitment to human rights more broadly. And last Sunday, you wrote a piece in the New York Times that said the U.S. must stop being an apologist for the Netanyahu government. Since you wrote that, the president has been very supportive of Israel. Do you think the administration is being an apologist for the Netanyahu government?
Look, John, all that I think is that given the incredible suffering in Gaza, where we have a poverty rate of 56%, 70% of the young people are unemployed, and after the Israeli attacks You have wastewater plants destroyed, clinics destroyed, hospitals destroyed. I think the United States has got to develop a even-handed approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We have to be pro-Israel, but we have to be pro-Palestinian. And I hope and believe the president understands that. And I was delighted to see that he is moving forward to try to rebuild with the international community rebuild Gaza after all of that destruction.
You mentioned an even-handed approach. When I read a portion of your editorial to Prime Minister Netanyahu, he thought it was preposterous, your claim that he had created the conditions and that he'd made peace impossible, because he said, how do you have negotiations with Hamas? They are dedicated to the destruction of Israel. President Biden again said that this week when he said, until the region says unequivocally they acknowledge the right of Israel to exist as an independent Jewish state, there will be no peace. How do you have an even-handed approach to terrorists who want to destroy Israel?
Well, what you have got to do is also understand that over the years, the Netanyahu government has become extremely right-wing, and that there are people in the Israeli government now who are overt racists. You have in West Jerusalem people being evicted from their homes. Tremendous pressure on people within Israel, the Arab community, as well as Gaza. So you have a very difficult situation. You have Hamas, a terrorist group. You have a right-wing Israeli government, and the situation is getting worse. And all that I'm saying is that the United States of America has got to be leading the world in bringing people together, not simply supplying weapons to kill children in Gaza. This last series of attacks killed 64 children and destroyed a large part of the infrastructure of Gaza in a community that has already been one of the most uninhabitable territories in the world.
You have put forward legislation that would delay the sale of military equipment to Israel. Would you also put the same kind of conditions you'd like to see on that aid to Israel, on any aid the U.S. gives through the UN or otherwise to the Palestinians, to make sure that Hamas doesn't get any of it?
Absolutely. Look, Hamas is a terrorist, corrupt, authoritarian group of people, and we have got to stand up to them. But once again, our job is not simply to put more and more military support for Israel. It is to bring people together. And we can't do it alone. We need the international community. But that's what I think we need to be doing.
Let me ask you about how this has played out here at home. The Anti-Defamation League says there were 193 reports of anti-Semitic incidents this week, up from 131 the previous week. So that's during this period while the crisis began. In the past, you've said it should be possible to be a critic of Israeli policy but not be anti-Semitic. But it doesn't seem to be playing out that way with this uptick in random attacks.
Anti-Semitism is rising in America. It's rising all over the world. That is an outrage, and we have got to combat anti-Semitism. We have to combat the increase in hate crimes in this country against Asians, against African Americans, against Latinos. So we got a serious problem of a nation which is being increasingly divided, being led by right-wing extremists in that direction.
There are a number of liberals who use the word apartheid to describe Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. A number of them liberals in the House who use that language. The executive director of the American Jewish Congress, who handled Jewish outreach for your campaign, has said that word, Joel Rubin, has said that using that word has increased the level of vitriol that has contributed to this anti-Semitism. Do you think those who share your view should not use that kind of language?
Well, I think we should tone down the rhetoric. I think our goal is very simple. It is to understand that what's going on in Gaza today is unsustainable. When you have 70% of the young people unemployed, when people cannot leave the community, when hospitals and wastewater plants have been destroyed, that is unsustainable. And the job of the United States is to bring people together. And that is what we have got to try to do.
Well, who could be against bringing people together? But like I said before I showed the clip, you notice Bernie Sanders did not answer the apartheid question as to whether that is an appropriate label for Israel or whether it contributes to anti-Semitism. You can let me know what you think about that question. If there is a right answer to that question, which Bernie Sanders, despite being one of the more honest politicians out there, certainly more honest than Cory Booker, he dodged that. You have to admit he dodged that question. But anyway, I did want to finish up the program. That was, like I said, the last news clip. I appreciate all of you who joined me for the live show. I saw that Sinful Solutions and GWolf333 also gave me some super chat contributions along the way. The standard monetary donation of thanks required to prop up the capitalist system from GWolf, so thank you for that. I don't want to finish the show without the Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip for the Dash and Sandy fans out there. Dash my cat and Sandy the dog. And Sandy is such a low-key, mellow dog that, as I've talked about before, I can't feed the dog. Can't feed the dog Sandy without having to stand and watch the whole time to make sure that the cat Dash doesn't come in and steal all of or a significant portion of Sandy the dog's food. This, even though Sandy is like, I don't know, 6 times the size of Dash. I should figure out the weight at some point. But anyway, it happened again this morning. I caught it on video. Oh, there's Sandy now. I caught it on video where Sandy's lying down right there right now. I don't know where Dash is, but Sandy is often the one live in-person viewer for my show. But anyway, this morning I did catch Dash the cat trying to eat Sandy's food, and you'll see I had to pull him back over in this clip. Stop it. And I feed Sandy twice a day. I mean, it's not always me, but whenever I do it, that's it. I actually have to like guard Sandy's food from Dash the cat. So that's my life. That's my Dash and Sandy or Dandy life. I hope you enjoyed the Dash and Sandy clip. And I will be back next Sunday for the final, after 8 years, the final Sunday of my LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Then I will be moving to the Monday Media Mix-Up. The Monday Media Mix-Up. Starting Monday, June 7th. And as to how that will change the show and whether I'll be adding in other things, I guess we'll wait. You'll have to wait and find out. But that's what's happening in a couple weeks. Thanks for joining me. And until next Sunday, or I have some other reason to upload some other kind of video, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.